I'm really honored to be joining these three women on this stage today. And I just wanted to kick things off by talking about mentorship. I would love to turn to you three and ask, is mentorship important to your careers, and why? Do you want to start, Naj? Sorry. I made eye contact with you, and I was like, you look like you want to speak to this first.
Is mentorship important to my career? I think mentorship was critical to where I am today. I think as a Black woman navigating the startup and tech space, I did not see myself reflected really at all. And so when I started the journey of Ethel's Club, it was important for me to connect with Black women, well, really anywhere, but specifically in the tech and startup world. So I kind of took to LinkedIn and Twitter and started looking for someone who I thought could help me build my company from a professional standpoint, but also a personal one. Mentally, physically, all of the things. And I stumbled upon a woman named Jessica Eggert. She's based in Seattle, and I sent her a really weird Twitter DM. I was like, I'm starting this company. I don't totally know what it is yet, but I think you could be really helpful and pivotal to towards its success. And she was like, this is a really weird DM. Let's get on a call. I was like, okay. So we had our first call, and it was just very, just a lot of positive energy, and she was one of the first believers in what Ethel's Club was at the time and what it is today. And so I credit a lot of our success to her, and she would always say like, no, I didn't do anything. She's one of those people. But she did a lot. She answers my crazy emails at night and in the morning and my texts, and was really just a supporter. So yes, it was crucial to where we are today.
Mm-hmm. And do you think, I mean, this is a bit of a leading question, but do you think that if people have mentors and they're extremely, like, they're used to having them, they're used to seeing themselves represented, they're used to having people just like giving them a little like boost here and there, are they even aware of it if they've always had it? Like, I think a lot about the value that we, particularly as women leaders, but in all senses, if you're marginalized in any capacity, how meaningful it can be to have someone reach out and give you a hand. Like, do you think that's why some folks aren't even aware that they have it? You know what I mean? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Go for it.
So we have two mics. I really resonated, your story really resonated with me, Naj, like the act of reaching out and finding mentors. I feel like that's been a common experience for me as well. And I think, in going back to your question, like, I think for me, being a first generation born here, like, my parents, they offered me like a lot of value and knowledge, of course, but we didn't really have like a lot of institutional knowledge or like generational knowledge around how to navigate bureaucracy, how to navigate tech startup world, how to, navigate all these things. There were just so many things that my parents didn't have the experience to offer me. And then, and also being like a woman of color and a Vietnamese American, and then you deal with a lack of representation in these other leadership spaces. Part of it for me, my community being the Vietnamese community, is so young. Like, we're a community of 40, 45 years. So even beyond my generation, like my parents' generation, many of them are not in these higher leadership positions that could mentor. I'm not saying that they're not there, but it's more limited, right? So definitely for someone in my position, I feel like actively seeking out has been an effort to get mentorship. I can't answer your question about if someone's always had it, because I've never always had it. So I can't speak to that experience, but yeah, I really related to that.
Same. I relate a lot to what you just said. Same with Korean Americans and just Asian Americans in general. It's really hard. I'm in the media / entertainment industry, so it's really hard to find executives or people in high positions of power that look like me. And sometimes, even if they look like you, they might not necessarily share the same values as you do, too. So it's like, people sometimes say skin folk and always kinfolk. So for me, mentorship, what's interesting is that I've sort of had to reframe mentorship in my mind. I always thought it was like, you need to go seek someone who's older, wiser, someone who, has a lot more years of experience than you. But I think what Issa Rae says, basically that she's gotten a lot of her mentorship from people, her peers. And I think for me, a lot of my mentorship really is just reaching out to friends and colleagues that share my interests, share my values, not necessarily in the same industry as I am, but when I'm asking questions, that they're able to add value, and also I'm able to learn from them. So for me, it's like mentorship is not just like this kind of relationship. It's a lot more like this for me. So.
I love that. No, I think that's very interesting. You think about the power that just comes with community. And I think that for some reason that can be quite threatening to people sometimes, right? For literally no reason, that can very much threaten people. But it's very powerful. I like what you said about it being not just a vertical, but it can be kind of circular, I guess. One thing that I was really struck by with these very talented panelists with me is that all of you have work that kind of creates space for people of color and folks who've been marginalized in their industries. And I wondered if we could speak a bit today about what happens when you're the first or the only in a room, what that means, and what sort of strategies we can share for folks who are finding themselves in that space for the first time, where they're the first or the only. And that can be racial, gender, sexuality, anything. Am I echoing? Sorry. Okay. Again, sorry, I had so much coffee before this. I'm like holding the microphone. Anyway, sorry, it's a very serious question. But yeah, just the idea of what are some strategies that we can share for folks who are finding themselves the first or the only for the first time? Sure.
So my entire company and business thesis is based around creating space for people of color. So I think about this literally every day. And I think the difficulties of being the first is being the first, right? There's a lot of doubt from people around you who may mean the best, from people who you don't know, from yourself, of thinking, well, it's 2019, maybe no one made this because it's really hard. Maybe it's impossible. Maybe it can't be done. And so having the wherewithal to believe that you could be that person, I think, requires a specific level of belief in yourself. And I struggled with that a lot when I started out, of sort of like, I have this great idea, and I'd go into these meetings and people were like, well, I don't really get it, and like, what are people of color? Like, I don't know, like, and they were just sort of like, I don't get this. And I'm like, well, maybe I don't get it either. Like, I don't know, now I'm confused. And I'm like doubting myself, and then I'd walk out and be like, wait, no, hold on. Like, this has legs, I just have to figure out how it all works. And so I think there is getting over that hump. I think once you've done it, there is this feeling of like, oh, you did it. Like, you're the first person to create a social and wellness club designed for people of color. Like, how do you feel? And I'm like, I mean, it's cool. I'm really proud and happy with my team. But I'm now on this like echelon of like, like I've cured a disease, and I'm sort of like, well, I mean, like, it's not to that level for me. And so a lot of it is sort of like trying to remain true to the larger idea. And in terms of kind of keeping that community around it, I've tried to personally continually pull people up. I have people email me from all across the world of like, I'm trying to build this kind of space. How should I get started? And I sometimes go between like, I'm really busy and I don't even know how to help you start this, but I always answer the email, I always take the call, and I think it's important in terms of creating a community outside of myself and outside of my company where I think there should be a lot of spaces that center people of color. I don't think there should just be one. I think that it should be, everywhere all the time. And so if I can help move that along, I think that's better for everybody. Yeah.
Sure. I think to add on to that, I guess a strategy is just make sure that you're always surrounded by people who share the same vision as you. For Tide, I think, Julie, who's the founder of Tide Film Festival, who is here today, she's right there. She always tells me, don't say we're the first. Because, I don't know, there's a lot of spaces, I think, especially for film festivals, where we really want to see all stories told. But I think Julie was really intentional in trying to start a film festival where, there is a time and a place and a value for Asian American film festivals, for, Black film festivals, etc. But, a lot of times when you talk to all the different communities, we all are sort of going through the same struggles, representation, etc. So, being able to provide one film festival where all stories are told, and obviously centered around people of color, I think for us, like, you know, it really just, it's a group of us women who were really just passionate about the same thing, and allowing for that to sort of help get through those humps of like, so what are we doing? Like, are we doing this? You know, because in some ways there's nothing to lose because you're kind of doing it for the first time. So there's no like set you know, parameters or like, you know, things that you have to reach. Like, you're setting your own goals, you're setting your own sort of pathway. So in that way, there's nothing that you can do technically wrong, but you know, there's a lot at stake because you want to make sure it's right. You want to make sure that it is a place where people feel, you know, integrated, involved, invested. So, you know, having a community of people, and particularly for me, like women who really understand that and see that past all of the minutia is really important.
Yeah, being the first, it's in anything, it's really difficult in a lot of ways. It's, you know, when you're the first, it feels like you're basically, in my situation, feeling like the first to really celebrate Robusta coffee, being the first to celebrate especially Vietnamese coffee, you're not just going up against yourself and then everything, not just saying like, can I do this? Like, you really have to have a lot of self confidence and conviction to pursue something, but it's also like you're constantly battling all of these other narratives and these other like old ways of thinking that has you know, really prohibited things from emerging as the first, right? Things that we imagine, but when we don't see it, it's hard to believe. So I think for me, it's really deconstructing all of these old conventional narratives that say like, it doesn't exist for a reason, or like it's not a worthy idea, or you're not worthy of that space or that leadership or that opportunity. So that's really challenging. But then it also comes with this immense, I feel, like responsibility and pressure to show people that your idea is valuable. But really, I think the responsibility that I struggle with a lot is responsibility to other folks that look like me, who want to be able to step out of a convention and do these things. But really, the beautiful thing is once you start to kind of like break out of the norm and put yourself out there, the visibility grows. And then I think one of my favorite memories, someone asked me like, what's been like one of the best things about starting Nguyen Coffee Supply? And I say, my absolute favorite thing that I felt to this day is when people DM me, write me emails, comment, and they message me and they say 3 words. They say, I feel seen. Like, it just touches me so much because I'm like, this is coffee, but it's also so much more than coffee. And it's also kind of sad that the lack of representation has been so deep on so many levels that they feel seen through coffee, right? They feel seen through Nguyen, you know? So that for me like has been the motivation, you know, to keep going. And to answer the last part of the question of, you know, what can we do to, you know, support people who are trying to break through in these ways? I think really, you know, there's so many people out there who will say it's not possible. So I think finding like your tribe, finding like-minded individuals who alongside you to kind of, you know, stay affirmed and, you know, strengthen your vision is really important, because it is possible. You just have to kind of find your community to lift it together.
Mm-hmm. No, I love what you said about feeling seen and how powerful that is. And that's something else that I think about, where if you have always seen yourself represented, you might not be aware of the lack of that for others. I don't know, I'm always trying to put myself in the feet of people who I don't see eye to eye with, where I'm like, how are they not seeing this? And I wonder, you know, can you speak a bit about the power of representation, about how powerful it is for you in both your current role and how it has been throughout your careers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could start, you know, visibility and representation, it's so powerful, right? And with my story, I think that's an example of how powerful it can be. And it's, you know, the I feel seen statement, it's not like just I feel seen and now I can start my own coffee company. Like, that's maybe part of it, but it's more of like I feel seen and I feel and I'm valued and my experience is valid and I can be fully how I want to be in this world, you know, and she's doing that, and maybe that's not my path of coffee, but like that means I can do what I want to do. Like, it's so much power to it, and it seems so simple, but I think when you grow up with such a deep lack of it, and you kind of like get a taste of it, it's so powerful. I think it really just allows people, to be seen and represented. It just makes you feel valid, even though everyone is valid, right? It just gives you that confidence to show up in the world however you want to show up. Oh, you keep that.
For me, specifically to the Tide Film Festival, that's really the reason why I joined. It's because I knew that there were so many other stories to be told, and stories that involve people that look like me on screen. And, to me, it's like, when you see your storyline, or even not even your storyline, but like someone that looks like you in a movie or in a film, I feel like in some ways that like is more impactful than like, because other people are going to be watching it too, that it's sometimes a little more powerful than other means of entertainment. I don't know. It's just film and TV to me are like superpowers, and that can shift culture. So for me, obviously representation is huge, but also having a kid too, and one on the way. My kid is a mixed kid and mixed race kid, and to me, like, even simple things like children's books, children's programming, it's so hard to find anything that looks like her, and then you start to see all the like narratives, right, of what's acceptable. And as a mother now, I see it even more so, and it's even more so important to me. So I'm kind of like, okay, like where can I be where I can empower some other like writers to be encouraged to write about their kids' stories and things like that. So I hope that it will change, and it will continue to change, especially for the next generation.
I think that the power of representation and feeling truly considered can be life-changing to people. And I see it when people walk into the clubhouse and they like drop their shoulders and they're like, this is cool. Like, I've never felt this way before. And I've spent a lot of time of being like with my notepad. I'm like, why? Tell me more. Like, what are you feeling exactly? Because I want to capture that every single moment that you're interacting with our company. But what we saw from the beginning was that, very similar to the Instagram message you get of I feel seen, was that we would get, I've been waiting for this my whole life where I could feel seen in a physical space specifically, of walking into a space and knowing that you're not going to be questioned, that you're not going to be seen as an other, and you're actually, considered throughout the entire process. We created this product for you. Everything we do in our office is meant to celebrate your existence. And I think taking that stand was interesting. A lot of people were like, well, do you have to bring up identity? Like, can't you just say it's a social club and like, just make the pictures look diverse? And I was like, nope, I'm gonna say what I meant, and I'm gonna say it with my whole chest, and we're for people of color, and that's what we're doing. And in the beginning, people were like, ooh, like, that's not gonna last. Like, people don't like that. And we found the opposite, which was that yes, we need it, and we deserve it, and we deserve to be considered at all points. And everything that you both are doing, we're just giving it space to be there 365 days of the year, which we also deserve. It shouldn't be a one-off event or a one-off panel or, a festival that lasts 3 days. It should be every single day that people value who you are as a person and as a consumer, as a real audience. And so, building out a space that does that was interesting, right? I went to go look for art by people of color, and I'm like calling these curators, and they're like, well, we have a Mackay Carter. We have one, he's the best. I'm like, okay. And then I call back to like, we have a Mackay Carter? I'm like, okay, there's gotta be other artists out here. Like, what is happening? So we had to get really scrappy and gritty and call people whose names, were not on Instagram to really populate our space. And what we ended up building was a space that not only, our people of color are our target audience, but the clubhouse was designed and sourced, and most of the items you see were all created by people of color. Our contractor, person of color, our electrician, Haitian, like we were very specific that the entire framework of what we're building be a celebration of what it means to navigate white spaces and have the freedom to kind of opt out into a different world where, you know, you are the focus. And so it's been very interesting to see once, you know, we've opened of how people live within the space. One of the small things we talked about in our meeting this past Monday, in our cafe area, we have a pantry with different goods all created by people of color, so like snacks that our members can buy. And we just have QR codes, you take out your phone and you buy them. And we were doing a tour and this woman's like, you can just like buy it on your phone? And I was like, yeah, it's super easy. And she's like, it's weird because I think like most people think of black people, they think about stealing. And like, you know, here, like you're not worried about that. And I was like, it hasn't crossed my mind, but then I'm thinking about like when I go into white spaces, I'm like, ooh, can't pick anything up. Like I'm gonna make sure that my hands are right here. Like I can't pick up the small wallet. Just things that we're all used to when we're navigating those spaces. You realize you don't have to do it at Ethel's Club, and it's this very interesting thing to see people like shift the way that they behave, which is just, I mean, like every day there's a new moment like that where people feel this sense of freedom that they're just not getting elsewhere.
No, that's really chilling. That like, it literally gave me chills. I think what all of you touched upon in this answer that I thought was really compelling is this idea of needing to be true to your vision, and the fortitude that takes in any circumstance. And I wonder if you can tell me, have you ever navigated imposter syndrome, and how? All day, every day.
I mean, even being on this panel, I mean, Sarah asked me, I'm like, oh my God, wait, what do I have to say? Wait, you know?
And then for me, when Jay said yes, I was like, yeah! Jay said yes! Because she's so badass. I'm like, well, she's too busy. She's a VP now. She's doing ties. She's like, and doing HBO stuff. I'm like, is she gonna say yes to our panel?
No. Yeah, it's something that I work on every day, you know, and especially when, you know, at my day job, I work at a marketing agency, and there's a lot of people of color that work at our agency, and that's very intentional by our managing partners in terms of hiring practices. And, you know, I'm considered, you know, one of the OGs there because I've just been there for a long time. And I think for me, it's really important for me to like really work on getting past that, because I'm seeing so many other younger folks coming up who live in a totally different world than I grew up in. And a lot of it's like, it's very layered. Like, you know, people grow up on Instagram now, and it's like everyone's just like going for likes and, you know, like curating their life like perfectly, you know, in social media. But I think, you know, for me, it's like really trying to get back to sort of like what's important, but then also like how do you work in a space where, like, at least for me, I get to work on amazing campaigns, primarily with HBO. So we've launched like all the Insecure stuff that you see out in the world. And for us, like being really intentional about the decisions that we make, about the partnerships that we engage, the influencers that we engage, you know, for us, it's like, for me, if I don't get past those things, like it's hard for me to, you know, make those decisions and empower others, and especially the younger folks at our agency, to also do the same. So, yeah.
Follow-up question to you?
Yeah.
Because, you know, you had mentioned that to me over email, the imposter syndrome, and honestly, I'm just so shocked, you know, because I'm like, how could Jane have imposter syndrome? Like, she's killing it, and you've been in the game for so long, you know, you're a veteran, you're experienced, you've done so many projects. I'm just curious, do you, like, where does imposter syndrome come from for you? Because maybe I'm just curious, because we can, I also have it as well, but I just want to know where, I just couldn't believe it. I'm like, there's no way.
Thanks, girl.
Yeah, I'm like, what? No, this needs to stop. Like, I will be your hype woman all day. Like,
I know. You know, it's so funny because my husband's here and he says the same thing. I'm like, Okay, honestly, the way, for me, I don't know where it comes from. Maybe it comes from like my upbringing where it's like, just work hard and do well. Like, for me, it's like anyone can do what I'm doing. That's how I feel. Like, I feel like if anyone had the years or the I don't know, places that I worked or came in contact with the people that I came in contact with, like, anyone could do it. Like, anyone can run a project and book artists for festival. I don't know, like, yeah.
I disagree.
So, but that's where it comes from. I feel like I'm not doing anything like extraordinary. I'm not like, thank you. But I also do understand that, and I tell people this all the time, like, I know that I'm not a person that wants to be like in the limelight for everything, right? I know that my value is in helping a visionary execute. So I'm okay with not being in the headlines, with not, being in the top 40, under 40 list, whatever. I'm okay with that because I know that it's in the work. And for me, as long as I'm able to help anyone execute their vision that also obviously aligns with mine, that's my role. That's what I take pride in. So, yeah.
I love that.
I think the best way to get over imposter syndrome is to start your own company, because you realize, like, I have no idea what I'm doing, and that's totally fine. Like, in my meetings, my team looks to me for answers. I'm like, well, I don't know. Why would I know that answer? I've never been a CEO before. I've definitely never run this company before. Like, I don't totally know what's going on either. And so I've sort of managed it by leaning into the unknown and just being like, don't have a good answer. Let's whip out the whiteboard and figure out an answer together collectively, because I don't know, and that has become my favorite phrase. I think before in my career, I had to be the one with all the answers, and I think when you're navigating, the corporate ladder, that's how you get ahead, right? You want to be the person who knows what's going on in the room, and you want to have all the answers. And I definitely played into that role of needing to know everything and having everything highlighted and being super on, and then, once I left that, as I'm building out something that did not yet exist, where there were no answers, I was able to just kind of be okay with not knowing, in which case I feel like the imposter syndrome kind of went away. The only time it kind of sneaks out is when I'm in investor meetings, but even now, after taking what feels like a million, I now go into those rooms and I'm like, I don't know what's next, but here's what I'm planning on doing, and either you're down for that or you're not. And I definitely didn't have that level of confidence before. But it's, again, I think it's just being okay with saying, like, not totally sure, but you know what? Let me look into this. I'm gonna do my research. I'm gonna do what I have to do to know, but being okay to say that.
Absolutely, yeah, the power of saying I don't know.
Is amazing. It's freeing.
It is freeing.
I just want to add one thing. For me, how I've kind of worked through my imposter syndrome is, as I get older, I've just become more and more intentional and aware of time and emotional energy and mental space and mind share. And it's just got to a point where it was just too exhausting. The self-deprecation, the self-doubt. I mean, it still creeps up, and I acknowledge it, and it has its role. But it just gets to a point where I'm like, I don't have time for this. Like, there are other things that, especially now that I run my own company, there are other things that require my energy, and my energy is better spent. It's not best spent on self-deprecation or wallowing in the space for too long. I'm like, we have work to do, and I need to get over it and move on. So that has been like a mental practice for me of like, we don't have time for this, because there's so much working against women, so much working against women of color. Like, I cannot add to that,
Yeah.
Another question with the Q&A.
Perfect. And I've actually noticed, just even in the tenor of this conversation and in this room, there is a really lovely supportive quality, and it's something that can happen in spaces that are dominated by women. I'm not saying it's necessarily going to happen, but it can. And so I guess for the last question, International Women's Day is upon us tomorrow. Can you speak a little to what it is like working with women? Like, what great experiences have you had? What have been drawbacks? Just what your experiences have been in that space. Safe space.
So I have a team of 5 people, not including me, and 3 identify as women, 1 person is non-binary, and 1 identifies as male. So I don't have any specifics on sort of like woman to woman anything, but I think just generally as a good rule of thumb, creating an inclusive atmosphere is really important. And when I started the company, that was like one of the things that I wanted to do. So the first thing we did as a company was hire a D&I person. And she walks in and she's like, huh, I've never had a whole team of people of color before. Like, I have to totally redo what I was planning on doing, because normally she's talking to a team full of white people. And the same things don't apply. And so I think just managing inclusivity and making sure it's at the forefront of what you're building is hugely important. And that inclusivity is across sexuality and identity of all kinds. And so again, as a company, we've made it one of the foremost things we are always working to better, because also our internal community reflects in the community that we're building, right? So we make sure that everything that's happening within our small pod is reflected to the community at large, because we want to make sure that as Ethel's Club grows, we're always inclusive, it's always honoring and intersectionality, it's always kind of pushing that envelope to be more accessible. And it's definitely not easy, but I think by making time for it, it becomes less of a thing. Like, I don't think I think about it, it just is, which is funny when I go talk to my friends who are like, navigating D&I at an enormous company, and they're like, it's just so complicated. And I'm like, just treat everybody with like equality and respect, like it should get you pretty far. But that's like, I don't know, revolutionary, so I'm gonna stay over here and do my thing. Yeah, like what an idea. So that is something we consider, crucial.
I think for me, it's one of those things where like I didn't have to think about it, and then when I get a question like that, I'm like, oh, wait a second. Oh yeah, like pretty much most of my career I've been surrounded by strong women. And where I work right now at Team Epiphany, I would say out of the senior leadership, pretty much it's maybe 80, I don't know, Susan, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like maybe 70, 80% women of color in VP positions or higher. Our managing partner is a Chinese American woman. And then for Tide Film Festival, the entire leadership is all people of females of color, women of color. So to me, it's always been a part of sort of the groups and the people that I work with. So I kind of don't think about it, but then when I do think about it, I'm like, oh, that's why we move quickly. That's why we can, agree on things, and then people have like processes in place to like make things move forward correctly, And then I start thinking about the men that I work with, or not work with, but like have to work with. And then I'm like, oh wow, they have a lot of ego. Like there's a lot of like that you have to get, and I'm not male bashing by any means. My husband is my number one supporter. But I think, yeah, because I haven't had to think about it, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, this is just how things run. But when you think about it, I realize, wow, that's very powerful, and it's intentional, and it's what really helps make the work go easy.
Just real quickly, sometimes I catch myself, if I have an event and I have like a team of volunteers, it's like that I look around, I'm like, oh shit, there's only 2 women and like 4 men, like the optics just look so bad, But when you're so small, like my team, it's just me and another full-time person and a part-time person, and when it comes to volunteers, like who's free, and like on that one day, there just happened to be like all like my male friends were free, but I hated like being at the event and just feeling like it's an imbalance, there's the optics of gender equity, so I do catch myself just thinking about like, I have to be very intentional about how I bring people on, how I, even on a volunteer level, I want to make sure that aside from the practice of things, that the optics reflect our actual intentions. Yeah. But it does come up sometimes. It's like, oh, it's too many men here.
On that, thank you all so much, and thank you to you panelists as well. I wanted to open up if there's any questions from the crowd, if there's anything you want to ask any of us. Yeah? Do you want to speak? I feel like we can. I'll repeat it if we can't hear you. Nice.
Well, thank you, all of you, for sharing your perspectives. It's seriously super valuable and very timely for me personally. But I'm curious about how you guys go about building allies, what that looks like for you. I know we talked a lot about women, but just I'm interested, especially like you're in the startup world, you're in the agency world, you're everywhere. Like what I know when you're starting something, when you're at the forefront of something, it's really hard to build allies, and a lot of people don't believe in you, don't believe in you. So what is that? I guess maybe what's a good example of building an ally maybe you didn't consider, and then now it has built out?
For anyone who didn't hear, the question is about building allies.
What can you explain what you mean by allies? I just want to make sure I'm going to answer correctly.
People who are down with the cause, who are willing
Okay.
to co-sign it.
So this is similar to the response you had before, Jane, of sort of lateral community. When I started Ethel's Club, I looked to my peers to validate what I was building. I didn't necessarily look for someone who was older or wiser because I felt like that they wouldn't, co-sign it because it was too new and they wanted all of these metrics that it didn't have and wanted details, where I would tell people, when we started the club, I had this super vague website because I didn't know what I was doing, as we've learned. And it said like a space meant for you. Like that's all it was. And people were like sending us messages like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen in my whole life. And I'm like, so like what about it is so cool, And they were like, this is like amazing, this is revolutionary, you're starting a movement, like all these things where I was like, what? Like I don't even know what it is. And now that we've gotten further and it's a much clearer product, we're still getting the same responses, which is good. But I think a lot of that energy of me waking up every day and like, I am building this thing for these people who won't say out of my DMs, who are emailing me asking like why they can't apply for a membership, because I'm like, well, it's not real, so that's why. That enabled me to kind of keep going, and a lot of those allies have become investors, they've become employees, they've become customers. One of our first members was the first DM I ever got, telling me that my website didn't work because she couldn't put her card in. And I was like, ma'am, there's no way to do that. I don't even know, there's not even an address on it. Like, what are you even signing up for? So, love her now. But at the time I was like, I don't like this person. But she believed in it, right? She was like, I'm here for it. What do I have to do to make this real? I'll tweet, you want me to post something, I'll put it in my story. And I think that comes from talking to your friends and socializing with people who you're not necessarily looking for like the like top down like parental approval. It's much more like community driven. And I think it also helps you shape the product, right? Because these are the people you're building for. So when we were still trying to figure out what we were, as we talked to these people who were DMing us, they were like, oh, it'd be super cool if there's a podcast room. So, podcast room, okay? And now we have a podcast room because it kept coming up. So really trying to use that as a resource outside of just the feel goods that come in, it can be super valuable.
Everything Nash said, yeah.
Agree.
The community-driven lateral peers, yeah, that's been huge.
Anyone else? Yes, in the back. I love that. Anyone else? All right. Oh, one more, sorry.
Yeah, I'd love to build on that idea actually, because I think sometimes there can be an echo chamber of women talking to other very supportive, like this is such a safe space and that's amazing. And I think there's an element of it where you want to create community and strength and safe spaces, but there's also work to be done
For those who didn't hear, that was just a question about how do you negotiate between having a space that centers people of color and women and then speaking to white spaces, for example. Was that a good summary of it? Yeah. Okay. Just don't want to put words in your mouth.
So the term like multicultural marketing is in. And is in right now. Diversity and inclusion is in right now. And I think people are starting, and when I say people, primarily white folks, are starting to realize that business-wise, it makes sense. Okay? When you have the same sort of people talking about the same things, you're gonna get the same results. Right? So when you involve people from all different backgrounds, all different thoughts, etc., and you bring them in a space where business happens, then business gets better. And I feel like that is starting to finally take precedence, and also, you know, people are starting to realize like, oh, like this is a thing, you know? So to that point, people who are already in the space doing it right, I think honestly it speaks volumes. So basically, if you believe in something, particularly when it comes to people of color, and you're driving business, whether it's a coffee company or a wellness space or a social space, like people will now start coming to you because they realize that this is better for their business, you know, and it's gonna frankly make them more money too, you know? Yeah, like, for instance, like when we first started HBO, with HBO, and Insecure first came out, people were like, wait, but you need this much money for this marketing campaign? Like, why can't you just like, you know, do it for like nothing, you know? And we're like, no, this makes sense. Like, you've invested in it content-wise, so from a marketing perspective, you have to engage the people that you are speaking to, right? And they deserve the same amount of dollars than any other Game of Thrones campaign has, you know? So, and then once it happened, and they saw how crazy big it got, then they're like, oh, okay, yeah, okay. So what's the next Insecure, you know? So in that way, I feel like, you know, you don't necessarily have to like always like ask. It's like, do the work, do it right for your people, and, you know, the right people will come to you, you know? And then you also start to find allies that, you know, maybe you need to give them a little nudge, like, hey, like, I know you're interested in this, like, what do you think? You want to partner with us? And that's kind of how Tide works too. It's like, you know, we're finding people who just need that extra little, come on, we could do it together kind of thing. So, but I think, again, like, staying true, do it right, and it'll happen.
I've personally and professionally opted out of trying to help white people do anything in regard to centering people of color. So that's sort of like my general take on the question. I believe that for us to be truly considered at those dollar amounts where you're not having to argue on our behalf, it has to come from the top. Like, where is all the money coming from? And I would like to have people of color own that entire experience, where you can actually opt out of the white minority, you know, and invest back into the companies that value and that see you as real consumers. Because I'm sick of being like the new D&I champion, which I've fallen into, and I constantly say no to things. They're like, hey, can you come to our company and like talk about like people of color? And I'm like, at large, or like, and what specifics? And they don't know, and I mean, it's 2020, you could Google and read things, and they're opting out of that for the shiny panel where they're gonna spend a lot of money on like the catering, and everyone gets to go to the auditorium for the day, and like, I don't respect it from a business decision, and I feel like it's not people putting in the work, and I'm too busy to put in work for you. And so my way of handling that is to say, I'm going to I'm gonna go build my own thing, and I'm gonna actually center people of color in a really authentic, genuine, and intentional way, and I'll buy your company in a couple years because you'll have failed at this because that's just what's gonna happen.
I think when I think about the broad spectrum of social change, I think everyone has a role, and I think people can choose how they want to spend their energy, right? Whether it's like, I choose to completely center my community in my work to create these spaces, and that's gonna be all my energy, and or I'm gonna do this and a little bit of like trying to like connect with like, white space. That's one thing. But I don't think that one body or one person, one mission has to try to do all of it. I think it's about knowing like what the role you want to play in that movement, and then finding allies, right, who believe in your vision, like you were saying, and then maybe tapping your ally and like, hey, let's align, let's work together. But yeah, in general, it's just I also choose to center my community in my work, and then making it as inclusive as possible with coffee, and then but always centering my community, and then finding allies to open that up.
Thank you all so much. Oh yes, go.
Thank you for presenting and sharing your thoughts on starting your companies, working in agencies, and like bringing voice to women and people of color. With that, could you maybe give a name of a company or organization that you really want us to check out that you believe in currently that's important to you?
I love this question. She asked our panelists to please name a company that you really believe in that is centering people of color and women and communities you'd like to support.
The company that I really believe in, that I also work very closely with, is called Mekong NYC. They're based in the Bronx. They're the only organization in New York City serving the Southeast Asian community in New York City. They focus a lot of their work around anti-deportation efforts, immigration services, serving the immigrant community, creating culturally relevant healthcare services, and also we are working collectively on a big census campaign to make sure that all of our communities are counted, and that's actually going to be the theme of the next SightGlass census work and representation. So, MekongNYC.org.
Awesome. Mine is a woman that I support dearly. She's actually here today. She goes by Ask Dr. Jess. She's over here. She's obviously a Black woman, a Black psychiatrist, and she basically leverages Instagram, social media to have conversations about mental health, particularly within her own community, but the POC community at large, and trying to destigmatize the conversations around mental health.
I follow you on Instagram. I was like, Ask Dr. Jess is here? What? Hi. So mine would be the Black Trans Women Fund. They're a fund that helps Black trans women find safety and support in terms of housing, mostly housing, because that's a huge need, but the capital also goes to other things like food, job support, et cetera.
Thank you. Anything else? All right, that's a wrap. Thank you all so much, and thank you to these three.